Our final panelist is Michelle Ciccolo, and Michelle is really my personal hero of the evening. We originally had a different speaker scheduled yesterday due to an illness in his family. He had to drop out. Michelle offered to step in at the last possible moment, and now she's the last speaker. So that's great. Everybody has already said everything. And I will just say that we completely forgive Michelle for not having a slide presentation. I don't think we need any more slides. And we can certainly understand that on less than 24 hours notice, it's kind of hard to do that. So Michelle Ciccolo, she is the president and CEO of the Ciccolo Group, LLC, and she is on the board of Selectmen in Lexington.
Good evening, everyone. I want to thank the Watertown Public Transit Task Force for inviting me tonight. It's really fun for me to be able to participate in this panel. I have a great fondness for transit and a huge interest in active transportation. I'm also the former president of MAPC, so I've been involved in a number of communities helping to advance some transit projects. But I'm going to talk to you primarily about two programs or two services that we run in Lexington and a unique zoning district that we created in Lexington that helps fund some transit, and also talk to you about three pieces of pending legislation that I think everybody should keep an eye out for, because the legislation, any of the three legislations, may provide avenues for additional funding. So the Lexpress is a service that we've been running in Lexington since 1979. I really couldn't believe this when I looked it up, but 36 years. And we started with 8 shuttle routes running on half-hour headways, and funded it with a suburban mobility grant of some sort back in the day. I don't know what it was called back then. And operated it primarily independently until about 2006, when we lost funding for it due to a failed override. We had private funding carry the service for a couple of years until we were able to get it back into the budget. So right now, we only have 3 buses. 6 routes, because they're half-hour routes, and they all come in on large fixed-route loops around the community that try to capture every area of the town and circle through the depot, the historic train depot area in Lexington, where you can switch to a different route if you needed to get to a different part of town. So we fund it with tax levy money. About $320,000 is tax levy, and then there's about $90,000 in fares. We use transportation demand management funds to supplement. Those TDM funds are monies that we've built up from developers who have paid into the mitigation funds when they've built large projects, and that supplemental funding. We also have a very small grant of about $40,000 from the MBTA that's been an ongoing grant for years. So that kind of keeps the Lexpress alive. It's heavily used at the 7 o'clock and 3 o'clock hour, and I hear it's at capacity when the students are using it, but during the day, in the middle of the day, we're seeing closer to 10 people riding an hour, which is not huge. And we're looking at ways to improve that by adding in some senior services and some more direct connections to some of the senior housing projects in town, because we do not run a senior shuttle, unlike many other communities that have a senior-only shuttle. So we're trying to look at our routes and see if we can pick up more ridership during the day when ridership is low. And we have this neat thing called a Flex Pass, where if you buy a bus pass for your kid, you can also have a reduced Lexpress Flex Pass that lets you ride the Lexpress as well. So I'm also going to talk to you about a little bit more about the REV, which Monica does run for us. That was started up in partnership with our economic development director in town and the private businesses that stepped up to help fund it. Back then, we used what's called a JARC grant. Those are no longer available, but that was Job Access Reverse Commute funding, which was federal funding. And it was 80% subsidy through that grant and 20% business supplement funding. We thought that grant would be available for a couple of years. I believe at the time they thought it was going to be a 2 or 3 year grant, and then they canceled it in year 2. So the town and Monica together had to go out and sort of shake the bushes and get the businesses to continue to participate. So the second year, we had 60% funding coming from the businesses, and the town decided to use some of its TDM money, its transportation demand management money, and fund the other 40% because we were seeing significant ridership increases. And recognize the importance of that reverse commute. In year 3, we're now at 25% funding by the town and 75% by the business community, and hope to get to something close to self-sustaining in the following year. The great thing about having the town participate with some of its funds is that was what gave us the leverage and the opportunity to open it up to the public a little bit more, to add that stop in Lexington Center and to collect people at Alewife at the end of the day coming back to Lexington, which is a real benefit to the public at large and the community. So we've seen that be a huge success, and just to give you some perspective, we have about 8,000 employees on Hartwell Ave, which is where the corridor that the REV shuttle primarily serves. 10,000 at the Hanscom Air Force Base, but we're not going onto the base. But we only have about, there are 10 large property owners that own most of the property on Hartwell Ave, but only about 6 of the businesses have been paying into the service, but we don't restrict the use of, the ridership to the businesses that are paying in. We let it, any business, any employee on the corridor have access to the shuttle. That's important because the more people that participate, the more that see the benefit. One of the ways the town's been working to sell this to the business community is by encouraging them to, the property owners, to factor it into their leases going forward, so it becomes part of their normal operating expenses. Because if their tenants see a great value in having this service, then there's a way to just make it a part of their leases. So we hope that it'll be self-sustaining if it does get worked. As more leases come up for renewal, that it gets worked into part of what the fees that the tenant pays. We hope that will give the service some long-term viability. Okay, so also on the Hartwell Ave corridor, we have something called the Transportation Management Overlay District, TMOD. And that was a concept we were trying back during the recession and slightly before, trying to look at ways to increased density on Hartwell Ave. A lot of the buildings are single and double story. We wanted to see new growth there. It's very close to 128. And we wanted to see expansion. And a lot of the developers told us one of the impediments to expansion was the real expensive cost of doing the transportation studies and analyzing all the broken intersections that were immediately around that corridor. And putting all that burden on the developer was preventing them from going forward. So what we did is we did the analysis of the whole corridor along Bedford Street and the intersection, and came up with sort of a concept of what it would cost to improve all of the transportation infrastructure, along with adding bike lanes, sidewalks, bus shelters, and the shuttle services, and costed that out and determined in advance what it would it be like to have those services and that improved infrastructure, and came up with a $5 per square foot cost if people want to use the overlay district avenue for development. So we left the underlying zoning in place, but we added an alternative that you could come in with a development proposal through a special permit and know upfront what your mitigation costs would be, and you wouldn't have to do the traffic studies and the transportation analysis. So your pre-development costs would be lowered greatly, and we increased the FAR, the floor area ratio, so they knew they would be able to get increased density. We're starting to see some permits. We finished all of that work right before the recession hit, so we didn't see a lot of new development. But we do believe that this is going to be a great tool for us going forward to be able to then fund more of the shuttle buses and transportation services that everybody's looking for. So the final things I would like to talk to you about are the 3 pieces of legislation I think are worth keeping an eye on. One of them is the Transportation Ballot Initiative, which basically is the way transportation is funded in many other areas of the country, where cities and towns can group together, or regions can group together, to put an improvement on the ballot directly to the voters and use local tax revenue. And here it's not been determined what tax revenue would be used, but some people have floated things like sales tax or real estate tax specifically to fund the improvements they want. And transit is one thing that could be funded with that. Legislation is in its early stages, but it's sponsored by Senator Downing, Senate Bill 1357, and Representative Walsh, House Bill 1862. So that's an act relative to regional transportation ballot initiatives, and we do hope that will really take hold and become something that will get passed in the Commonwealth to give cities and towns and regions other tools that they could use to work with their neighbors, because transportation is all regional. It's never single town focused. The other piece of legislation is the Mass Smart Growth Alliance sponsored legislation called Community Benefit Districts. They're similar to business improvement districts, where businesses can group together and essentially form a nonprofit and agree on the fees that they would charge themselves to go out and do something specific. They're used in the past by downtown districts to improve the look of the downtown, but they can be used in this new formula for transit services, and that is House Bill 144, and it's called Community Benefit Districts. If that passes, that'll be yet another tool that people can use to work together, with primarily being driven by the private sector. If a group of employers want to get together and develop some fees to advance a service that they want to see. And the last one is still very much in its infancy, but written by the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, something that I urged them to write because I thought municipalities needed an additional tool as well. And this is an act relative to betterments for transit improvements. And it's Senate Bill 1013, filed by Senator Ken Donnelly. He represents Lexington and Burlington and parts of Woburn, and I forget the rest of his district, Arlington too. But the concept of betterments are used by municipalities to fund linear improvements like water and sewer and sometimes streets. And the property owners get a benefit from the infrastructure that the community installs, and their property values tend to go up. So it's often the fees are parceled out to each property either by the number of linear feet of frontage they have or by some other formula that's determined to be fair. And this concept, this legislation, would allow transit to be one of those betterments that the municipality could levy a fee for, paid out through the real estate bill over time. And it's direct abutters to the improvement and abutters to abutters is the way it's written now. This bill, it still needs a lot of work because it's very early and new in its concept, but this was an attempt to make sure that municipalities had additional tools really to get at that fairness factor. On Hartwell Ave, I mentioned that the REV shuttle bus is being funded by 6 of the 10 large property owners, and 4 of them are sitting out, not funding anything, while their employees and their tenants are getting the benefit of using this service. So, if there are a way to more fairly distribute the cost to everyone and have the municipality participate, because with betterments, typically the municipality will pay a portion of it, sometimes even 50% of the cost, and then the property owners pay the other 50%. And that gives it the access to the public benefit because the community is paying for part of it, and then the property owners are paying for part of it. So that's a tool that property owners and municipalities could drive, as opposed to the other tool that would be driven more by the business sector. So those are 3 ideas, things that are coming down the pipe that we hope will give us additional resources to develop some of these transit services that everybody wants. And I'm just going to close by saying that Watertown's really lucky to have Steve Magoon, and I think municipalities that have staff that focus on this do far better. So as you talk to other cities and towns, Lexington is in a similar situation. We have a transportation coordinator. We also have an economic development person. And I'm finding in all the communities that I talk to that if you really want to get into providing transit services, it's really helpful to have a staff person coordinating some of this because it makes your services more meaningful and relevant and tailored more specifically to your community. So kudos to you guys for what you have in the works. Thank you.